I'm Michael Figura, Vice President of Operations at the Open Applications Group, and today we're going to be talking about iterative team development within SCORE. So let's first talk about how the SCORE software works within the average development lifecycle. So we usually start with a process proposal, and that is to say that we're going to be implementing one or more business processes that involve one or more transactions, et cetera. And so we're going to be taking data out of some system A, and transforming that data, and then loading it into system B. And so that usually starts with a process definition and a data definition of what data comes out of that system or into that system. And so this is how we kind of start planning business processes and APIs. And so from there, bot analysis is done within OAGIS. So that's to look at which bot most closely matches that business process and that transaction and message type. And so if you have a process purchase order, for instance, coming out of a system and going towards another system, then you would use the process purchase order bot. If you have a goods movement, you would use the process move product bot, etc. So we analyze our BODs and determine which one is the best fit. And then we start the OAGIS mappings from the original data definition and the export format coming out of System A and map that to OAGIS. And that usually results in a developer mapping specification. And that's what gets the analyst, hands that to the developer and says, okay, you can start coding according to this specification. And in SCORE, we have BIEs. So our BODs kind of align with business information entities in SCORE. And so depending on that developer mapping specification in SCORE, we may go in there and take that BOD and further break it down and say, we don't want the huge BOD that ships with the OAGIS product. Rather, we would like the streamlined, trimmed down BIE that we can express using SCORE. And then from there, we can express that BIE as an XSD or a JSON expressed schema. And that again goes back to the developers, and they can begin coding according to that interface. The developers can then take a tool like Altova's XML Spy and use the XSD expression that comes out of SCORE and generate an XML instance message that's used for testing. And then we can take that instance message, populate it with as real world data as possible, and then shoot that message across the system test environments to see if it actually works as it was intended. And then from there, we're going to find one or more problems with that message. Some fields are the incorrect data type, some fields are missing, and then we go back to the original data definition, and the entire iterative development life cycle begins again. Now, SCORE fits really well into the middle of this for bot analysis. So instead of opening up the OAGIS zip file that you can download from our website, instead of going through all those folders and analyzing bots that way or using our documentation, you can now open up SCORE and start profiling messages and analyzing the various bots that exist with our product and our standard within SCORE. And then you can obviously profile those things, those BIEs, very quickly within SCORE. And then obviously at the end there, you can express the XSD and JSON that your development team needs to generate and use for the APIs. So let's talk about how an iterative team or an agile team would work within this same development lifecycle. So let's take a hypothetical team and say we've got an analyst named Joe. And Joe's going to look at that data definition. He's going to analyze the BODs. He's going to create some OAGIS mapping related information that says this is how the data definition that comes out of System A most closely aligns with the BOD that he has chosen. And he'll produce a developer mapping specification, and he'll also work inside of SCORE to create a trimmed down version of the BOD expressed as a score BIE. Now we have the developers. Let's say we have a developer named John. John will work with the OAGES mapping information that Joe has put together. He will also work with the mapping specification delivered to him by the analyst. And then he can also go in and create his own profiles or work with Joe's profile. So we'll see how Joe can share an existing score profile with John so that they can work on the exact same artifacts within score at this on the same project. And then John can also have permissions to generate an XSD or JSON expression. And then John will develop an XML test instance document or JSON test instance and give that over to Sarah, the tester. Now, Sarah doesn't necessarily have to work within score. Joe and John can handle most of the work in score, and then they'll produce some instance messages that Sarah can use for testing. And ultimately, all of these people report to a woman named Jane, who is the product owner. And Jane will be as we're about to look at, Jane will be the ultimate approver or disapprover of what becomes a published artifact within score. And so Joe will work within score to produce the beginning of the BIE profiles, and Joe will work with the developer John to refine those BIEs over time as we go through these development cycles. And Sarah will test and say, okay, here's the report that says what was working and what wasn't. So Sarah will produce a bug report and give that report to Jane, and Jane can update the Agile dashboard, whichever product they happen to be using or development methodology they happen to be using. And Jane can, on a daily basis during the daily stand-up, provide feedback to the team. And so Jane knows where the project is at any time based on the work that Joe, John, and Sarah have been performing. And so let's jump out of this. Let's jump out of the PowerPoint and jump into score. And we'll see how this works in the real world. So I'm going to log in as Joe Analyst. And Joe's going to go to his existing BIEs that he's working on. So we can see Joe Analyst. Joe is working on process purchase order. And it's in editing mode now. So let's go in here, and we can see that Joe's given it a version 1.0, and we'll see how that becomes handy in just a moment. And so Joe's going to add a purchase order line item, and let's give it a description and a line item identifier, and then we'll check the item and we'll hit updated. So now Joe needs to hand this over to John, the developer on the project, so that John can start working with it in his development software and his code. So Joe needs to share this process purchase order that he's working on with the developer, John. So let's see how we do that. We're going to hit the transfer ownership, and I'm going to type John Dev, and there's John, and I'll check John and hit transfer. Okay, now I'm going to log out of score. I'm going to hit the log out button. And now I'm going to log in as John. Okay, now we'll go to John's existing BIEs. And we can see process purchase orders now sitting here. And the owner, the current owner, is now John Dev. We can see it's the same version 1.0. So let's go in as John and start making some minor edits, because while working with this schema, John noticed that Joe, the analyst, forgot to include quantity. So I'm going to check the quantity box, and then I'm going to hit update. Now, if we want to as we go through these iterative cycles, we can make the version of these schemas adhere to whatever sprint cycle we happen to be on. So as John works on this on, say, sprint number 2, John can say, well, the new development iterative cycle for version control is now 1.1. So John's going to update this, and then he's going to pass the ownership back to Joe because we are at the end of the sprint. So we'll hit transfer ownership, and we'll go back to Joe, analyst. And there's Joe. And now we're transferring the ownership back. Now I'll log back out of Score as John, and I'll log back in as Joe, analyst. And we'll go back to the screen to view our BIEs. And now we see process purchase order is now under our ownership yet again. But look, the version's changed. Now it's 1.1 because John updated that. So let's go into the edit mode here and say that this is now ready to be viewed as a candidate. What happens when we publish it as a candidate is that it's no longer in editing mode. So if you view it again, we can see that it's in candidate state. Well, now this means that the entire team is able to look at the process purchase order schema, and it's ready to be considered for review for publishing to production. And so let's jump out of this now. We're going to log back out, and we're going to log in as Jane PO. So Jane is our product owner, and she's going to go to her list of all the BIEs, and she can now see the process purchase order in candidate mode. Before, she would be able to see other people's work, but she wouldn't be able to view the work. So now Jane can come in, view the candidate, and say, let's see if it has that quantity like we reviewed in our testing. Sure enough, quantity is there, but she can't edit this. She can't add a unit price. See, this box is uncheckable. So she says, well, we need unit price as well. And so she lets the team know, and so let's take it back out of this mode. Let's take it into editing mode again. So we can't do that here. There's no way to check this box. What we have to do is go back in as Joe because he's the current owner. So we'll sign back in as Joe, go back to the list of BIEs, and let's have Joe take this and pull it back out. So we're going to say back into editing mode now. And now Joe's able to edit this. So it's no longer in candidate mode, it's back in editing mode. And Joe can come in and add unit price to our schema. But now we're on another sprint here. So let's update it again to version 1.2, and then we're going to publish it again as a candidate. And now we can log back out, log back in as Jane. Jane PO. We'll view it one last time for a final iterative review. So Jane can look at this. Jane is the ultimate stakeholder, so she is the one that gives us the thumbs up or down as to whether or not this is allowed to go to production. Unit price is there, so Jane can give Joe the official thumbs up. So now let's log back in as Joe. Jane just gave Joe the thumbs up to take it to production. So Joe will view the BIE, and now he's going to publish it finally. So now we're going to publish it, and we get a warning here. Once you're in publish state, it can no longer be changed or discarded. And we are ready for production. All the testing has been done. All the fields required are there. And so we're going to publish it. And now if we go to the list of BIEs, we'll see it's green. It's published. That means it's in production, and we know what sprint cycle it went into production because we can see version 1.2. Now, if we need to make an edit from here, we can't because it's been published. But what we can do is create a copy of that existing BIE. So we can, if we've made some extensions to this, if we've created our own custom component, you can see that process shared from published back to editing by making a copy of that existing BIE. And that's it for this session. Next month, we'll be talking about some more advanced concepts like custom core components and user-defined components. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.